So welcome. The handout I sent out a while ago, and hopefully you will have it and have access to it. Begins with a quote from Leonard Cohen from this fabulous interview he did with Arthur Kurzweil. Arthur is a amazing teacher, I think rabbi, certainly an amazing teacher in his own right, and publisher. He published hundreds and hundreds of books, amazing books, a lot of Jewish books and a lot of other books too. And also Arthur was a very long-term student of Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, and just as he's written lots of books and about that and published lots of Rabbi Steinsaltz's books. Anyway, Arthur did an incredible interview with Leonard Cohen in 1993. I can send anybody who wants. And this is one of my favorite quotes from the interview. Leonard Cohen says about Judaism, "We have the stuff, but we don't take it seriously." I think a lot of us who are here in this class, who are in this path, who are already know about AJS, will understand in your own way what he's saying. I understand him to be saying there's just so much incredible spiritual depth, right, to our tradition, and so often, so many of us are exposed to a form of Judaism that, for whatever reason, that just isn't emphasized. People don't know how to engage with it, practice it, teach it. It's tricky. And in so many Jewish spaces and settings and communities, it's just overlooked. It's just not what people focus on. So Bezrat Hashem, please God, in this class we'll have the merit of sharing ideas and practices together that will help us connect to the stuff, the good stuff that Leonard Cohen was talking about. And this are really some of my favorite teachings. It's such a joy and a privilege for me to be sharing them. So we should be blessed on our journey. So the first section, actually, we're not going to do the first few sources very slowly. It's more just like a quick overview for anyone who's not so familiar with the omer itself. What is that? And then Lag baOmer itself. And so I'm going to do it. I'm really just going to talk through it, and the sources are here for people who want to do further research and to provide a map. And as always, if people do have questions, you're welcome to put them on the chat, and certainly also to email me after the class if you want to go deeper into anything. So the omer, what is it? The Torah says in the first textual source we have in Leviticus 23, the bottom of page 1, the Torah says, count these 7 weeks. And actually count the days too, so count the weeks and the days, and that's what we do. We have an obligation to count each day and each week of this period between the second day of Passover, Pesach, all the way up to the 49th day, which is the day before Shavuot, Pentecost, our next festival. So this special period we're in right now, the Kabbalists, much later, and we'll see some sources about this in a moment, connect the 7 days and the 7 weeks with the 7 lower Sefirot. If you look at the diagram I've given you of the tree of life in the Sefirot, the 7 lower Sefirot are the 7 which Kabbalah, the mystics say, manifest most fully in this world. The upper Sefirot are in the realm of consciousness and spirit, but the 7 lower Sefirot we actually experience in our lives down here. And the first week of the Omer is all about Chesed, and the second week is all about Gevurah, and so on. And also within each week, the same applies for the days. The first day of each week is about Chesed, the second day is about Gevurah, and so on. So in each week, there's one day of the Omer, which is the same quality squared. So let me just explain that a bit more. Every day of the Omer is about the relationship between 2 qualities, 2 of the Sefirot, because what day of the week, what week are we in, and then what day of the week are we in? Right? Are we in the first day of the first week? It's Chesed Sheba Chesed. And if we're in the 4th day of the 4th week, similarly, Netzach Sheba Netzach. So whatever week it is, when you're in the same number day, that's it. Now, Lag baOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, our special day, just happens to be the 5th day of the 5th week. Doesn't just happen to be, nothing happens to be, but you know what I mean? So that's Hod Sheba Hod. So we need to bear that in mind throughout everything we're talking about. And Hod can be understood as lots of different ways, but means, among other things, humility, allowance, admitting, making space for, confessing, giving thanks. These are some of the layers of meaning around Hod. Surrender. So surrender, gratitude, humility, making space. These are some of the ideas. And Hod also on a certain level literally means glory. So it's a kind of a paradox, but it's the glory very specifically that comes from making space and surrendering, from being a vessel for something bigger than ourselves specifically. So that's helpful to bear in mind too, because like baOmer, our special day, is celebrated as a day of the inner revelation of the Torah, a day of mystical revelation. And that's very related to this quality of making space, letting something bigger than us come through us, which then creates a kind of glory. Now, Nahmanides, Ramban, our great medieval Torah commentator and Kabbalist, he is actually really more than anyone else responsible for Kabbalah, for Jewish mysticism entering the mainstream of Judaism. And he, by the way he did this is he wrote a phenomenal commentary on the Torah, which is largely about the plain meaning of the Torah, really engaging in a conversation with Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, the other great medieval commentator that he really looked up to. And then also Ramban also slips in a lot of mysticism. And he says here, the top source of the next page, 7 is the spiritual DNA of the universe. The reason that we're counting sevens, we count 7 days and 7 weeks of the omer, but also we have 7 days of the week, and also 7 years in our sabbatical year cycle, and then 7 rounds of the sabbatical year cycle until we get to the 50-year jubilee. The reason we're counting all these sevens is because he says that is how the world is made. That is the secret of creation. So there's something underlying reality he's inviting us to notice with that. And as I said, we're not reading these first few sources inside. It's there for further study, and you're welcome to contact me about them. I want to move fairly swiftly through them just to provide a background before we get to the meat or the tofu of the class. So the next couple of sources are from the 1500s, from Rabbi Isaac Luria, and really his student Rav Chaim Vital, who wrote down his teachings, the great Sfat Kabbalist. These are the primary sources we have for the spiritual practice of the omer being what it is to many people in the world today, a practice of improving our character traits day by day. So that whole idea really came from these Sfat Kabbalists in the 1500s. So Rav Chaim Vital writes that on the first night of Pesach, on the Seder night, on the first night of Passover, we get given this great big gift, this treasure. And then what we have to do over the next 7 weeks is slowly integrate and build a relationship with each piece of it, piece by piece. That we get this like overwhelming gift of liberation from Egypt, liberation from slavery, but we haven't actually earned it. And so then we have to spend 7 weeks actually growing up. And it really fits well with the whole story, the way the Torah and the prophets and the early Midrash tell the story that we were a child, like when we left Egypt, it was like being born, and then we were a small child, and we have to gradually grow up. So the omer is part of that period of growing up, and we do that by step, focusing on each quality. And one more source similar to that, the Sha'ar Kavanot, also from the same sources, from Rav Chaim Vital again, saying what the Arizal said, what Rabbi Isaac Luria said, saying again that work on the quality of each day. Each day has its own combination of the Sifirot, as I mentioned in the beginning, going back to that map. And this is where it comes from. Nobody was doing this before the 1500s, as far as we know. There's no indication of that. This is a primary source for that practice. And that last source there from Rav Sadok at the bottom of page 2, just reminding us, as Nahmanides said, if everything is made from sevens, if our whole universe is built from sevens in some mysterious way, then 7 times 7, 49, is in essence an aspect of completion. And actually this comes up many times in Kabbalah. The Kabbalists talk about, and even other sources talk about, how there are 49 levels of spiritual awareness, spiritual being, both plus 49 and negative 49. And if you go lower than negative 49, you cease to exist. And if you go above plus 49, you get to a kind of infinite place where then you start all over again in a whole different dimension. So 49 is the sevens and 49s, essentially how our universe is made. That was a lot. As I said, I wanted to go through it fairly swiftly. I hope that was okay for everyone. If there's any clarifying questions, which if anything just wasn't clear and people feel they would like to be resolved, I'd be happy to address it. But I don't want to kind of go into a discussion on that subject so much. I want to save that for the tofu. Is that okay for everyone? I'm seeing a lot of nods and smiles. Awesome, fantastic. Thanks for bearing with me. So let's do a little more, just a little bit more in the kind of background kind of way. We'll do this a bit more slowly though. Lag baOmer and its mysterious connection to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. This is the person that is talked about and sung about in connection to this day. Where does that come from? So let's look at some primary sources about this in section 2. The Talmud in Yevamot 62b. So I'm now on page 3 of the source sheet. It was said that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students, so 24,000 students, from Givat to Antipatris. And all of them died at the same time because they did not treat each other with respect. This is extra painful and ironic because Rabbi Akiva was famous for saying that loving one's neighbor, loving one's fellow person as oneself is the great principle of the Torah. So his students presumably knew that, but on some level just like weren't practicing it, right? So they died because they weren't treating each other well enough. There was some kind of plague, or possibly according to some interpretations, this is the rabbinic explanation for them dying in a revolt against the Roman Empire. It's also another explanation, but the plain meaning here from the Talmud is they died in some kind of divine act because they were not acting well enough. The world remained desolate, meaning all these Torah scholars died and there weren't so many others. Rabbi Akiva was a relatively unique, almost completely unique link in the chain of tradition at this point, because the Romans were persecuting Jews and especially Torah scholars very harshly. And the Romans understood at this point that they had to stamp out the leaders and the teachers and the spread of Torah if they wanted to stamp out further Jewish rebellions. So that's what they were doing. So there weren't so many other students. So when Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 students, the world in terms of Torah is desolate. Until Rabbi Akiva came to our masters in the south and taught Torah to them. So Rabbi Akiva then later found 5 more students, started teaching again, and then the world was brought back to life in these terms. These 5 students were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, that's Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai who we're talking about, Rabbi Elazar, ben Shemua. And it was they who revived the Torah at that time. It is taught that all of Rabbi Akiva's students died in the period from Pesach until Shavuot. That's our period, the Omer. Now, actually, let's read the next source and then we'll talk a little bit more about this. So Rabbi Shimon, this is also from the Talmud, from Gittin, would forget little of his studies, and what he removed from his memory, he removed only chaff. And likewise, Rabbi Shimon said to his students, my sons, accept my halachic rulings, as my rulings are the finest rulings of the finest rulings of Rabbi Akiva. Halachic is a Jewish law, so accept my legal rulings. So what I'm telling you, Rabbi Shimon is saying is, the best of the best. I've retained everything good, and I'm giving it to you, my students. So let's talk a bit about this. The tradition says, riffing and commenting on these passages in the Talmud, the later commentators, like for example the Meiri and others, come and say, not only did the students die between Pesach and Shavuot, as it says there at the bottom of the first passage, so during the Omer, but on Lag baOmer they stopped dying. That's one thing. On Lag baOmer, the plague stopped, the students stopped dying. Also things. Here are other things that various commentators and mystics say happened on Lag baOmer on the 33rd day of the 49 days. Yeah, I should explain that. Lag is how you say 33, for anyone who didn't get that. The Hebrew letters are also numbers. So Lag is 33. So Lag baOmer, the 33rd day of the 49. Other things people say happened on that period. Some say Rabbi Shimon was born on that day. Some say Rabbi Shimon died on that day. Some say Rabbi Akiva gave rabbinic ordination to Rabbi Shimon on that day. So maybe all those things are true. We don't actually know, but it's important to know that's what's in the tradition. But basically everything important happened on this day with regard to Rabbi Shimon. And again, remember, there aren't so many, really, there's no one else of significance passing on Torah at this point. Rabbi Akiva is it. And so when he loses all these students and then begins again, that's the difference between the world being desolate and the world being revived. And it's Rabbi Shimon who's the chief student, who's the best student of those who are reviving it. And he's not afraid to say it. He's saying, I'm doing this. So that's Rabbi Shimon as he appears in the Talmud. Now, let's read about this little who was Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai to piece that together with Jewish mysticism, and then we'll be ready to actually look at some mystical sources from him about our subject, about the inner spiritual revelation of the Torah. I'm just going to read through these bullet points, and we'll pause and come back together. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, also known by the acronym Rashbi, was a 2nd century Tannaitic sage, a Tana, in ancient Israel, in the period following the destruction of the Second Temple. He wrote or contributed to many key early works of Jewish law, halacha, and is often quoted in the Mishnah, the first code of Jewish law. The Zohar, Radiance, the key work of Kabbalah, claims to be written by him or be about him and his students and full of his teachings. He studied in the great academies of Yavna, which were founded by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and Bnei Brak, led by Rabbi Akiva. So he really received it from both of the main sources. His principal teacher, who was murdered by the Romans for his faith. Later in life, he founded an academy in the town of Tekoa, whose students included Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who compiled the Mishnah. So the Mishnah comes from Rabbi Shimon's student. So that's very important. Without the Mishnah, we don't have Rabbinic Judaism. So he's an incredibly important link in that chain. According to tradition, Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon, passed away on the 18th of Iyar, like baOmer, as we're talking about, in a couple of days' time. It's Friday, by the way, in case you're wondering. It's not today, it's Friday. The 33rd day of the Omer in Meron, a village near Tzfat in the Galilee, in northern Israel. So on Friday, there's going to be literally hundreds of thousands of people there, now that Israel is, at the moment, pretty much post-COVID. Thank God for the time being, and I hope it stays that way. This is how it always is in Israel, except for last year when it wasn't allowed. Hundreds of thousands of people go to Meron to celebrate Rabbi Shimon, like baOmer. That makes it the biggest gathering in the Jewish world by far. There's nothing that even comes close to it. So it's just incredible that this man who we're talking about, who lived all this time ago, but there's so much mystery shrouding every aspect of his life and all his teachings, has elicited this kind of response from. But believe me, there are not that many Kabbalists in Israel. So we're not talking about a gathering of people who are all like meditating on the Zohar. It's a bit more raucous than that. It's a very mixed gathering. A lot of trance, meaning the music, not so much the mystical trance, or the music. So let's see, one more thing. This day is observed by many as a Yom Hilula. So Hilula is a fascinating word. It means both a wedding and a celebration of somebody's death. And the idea is that when a righteous person dies, we mourn for their passing, but actually they celebrate their unification with the divine, that they are actually getting married to the divine. And that is what Rabbi Shimon said in the Zohar. According to the Zohar, he said, don't be sad, I'm dying. I'm going to be unified with the oneness that is all things. And not only that, this is good news for everyone, because my unification with my source is going to create great joy and enlightenment in all worlds. So it's hence a day that's celebrated. Ellen says, does the Hebrew calendar always match the Omer, i.e. is 18th of Iyar always 33rd Omer? Yes. And the dates always line up, but I should say also that sometimes the actual holiday is moved, as some minor holidays are sometimes moved. If they fall on or near Shabbat, sometimes they're moved so that they people don't like break Shabbat to prepare for them. So that happens, but the actual date is always the same though. Yeah, thanks for the question. Mention the pilgrimage people make and so on. Well, let's come back together and here I'm happy to pause and just hear if anyone has any questions or comments for a few minutes before we dive into our main subject of the spiritual Torah. Does anyone want to ask any clarifying questions? If not, that's great, because I'm really eager to get to the main course also. Fine, let's do it. Wonderful. Section 3, the inner mystical Torah. So we're going to build up a picture here from ancient sources through to more relatively recent Hasidic ones of how mystics have seen the Torah and related to it over the centuries. And like I said at the beginning, this is just some of my favorite stuff to teach and hopefully to practice with, which we're going to do together also. So let's start with this verse from Proverbs and then see how it's understood. So all of Proverbs chapter 8 is spoken from the point of view of wisdom. Wisdom is speaking, And the rabbis associate, really connect, identify wisdom with Torah. So for them, according to the rabbinic commentaries on Proverbs chapter 8, it's Torah who is speaking. Torah is personified and is saying all this stuff. And this is one of the verses from that chapter. I was with him, meaning Hashem, the creator, the Ein Sof, the infinite one. I was with him as a confidant. We'll talk a lot about that word in a moment. A source of delight every day, rejoicing before him at all times. So this is the Torah saying, I was with God before the universe was created, and I was an amon, a confidant. Again, we'll talk about that more. A source of delight, rejoicing before him at all times. So this word amon, which here is translated reasonably well as confidant, can mean a lot of different things. Let's see what one of the things it can mean, I should mention because it's not in this midrash, is it can mean a little baby. It can mean a nursling, a baby that's being nursed. So that's one. So one possibility is the Torah was a little baby that God was nursing before the world was created. And now let's see a few other possibilities. And this is not only from a very important early Midrash Genesis Rabbah, but this is from the very, 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 very beginning of it. This is the first thing the rabbis wanted to put in that very important Midrashic collection, which may well be our first such collection. So very, very key text. The great Rabbi Hoshaya opened with the verse from Proverbs. I, the Torah, was an amon, this word we're going to talk about, to him, God, and I was a plaything or source of delight to him every day. Now, here are some things that amon might mean. Amon might mean a pedagogue, like a nanny. So like before I said, amon might mean a baby that God is nursing, right? It's a very, very different image that the Torah is God's baby that God is nursing to the Torah is God's nanny that is looking after God. The Torah is like, God, don't forget to eat your greens and then I'm going to put you to bed. That's very different to being God's baby, right? So you see wildly different ideas there. Also, amon might mean covered or hidden, they say. So I was with God as something that was covered and hidden. I was concealed. I was not yet revealed. And also there was one who says that amon means great. So I was with God as something which was awesome. And again, not yet revealed. Okay, now we're going to go a little bit more directly connected to our subject and to what happens next. Alternatively, amon means artisan. The Torah is saying, I was the artisan's tool of God. Wow. So God is making the world and God needs tools to make the world. And the Torah is the tool for doing that. In the way of the world, the Midrash goes on, a king of flesh and blood who builds the castle does not do so from his own knowledge, but rather from the knowledge of an architect. And the architect does not build it from his own knowledge, but rather he has scrolls and books in order to know how to make rooms and doorways. So too, God gazed into the Torah and created the world. So this is that last line, God gazed into the Torah and created the world, is very often quoted. Some of you may have heard it throughout other learnings you may have done. And people understand it in all kinds of different ways. There are a lot of very kind of literal interpretations of it, like God looks in the Torah and sees the Torah talks about trees, and God is like, oh yeah, I have to make trees. Check that off my list. Right, did it. That's one way of understanding it, right? And there are obviously, deeper, more mystical ways too, which is what I'm a bit more interested in, right? It's like the Torah is a blueprint in some kind of spiritual way for the reality that's going to unfold. But what does that mean, of course? All right, let's look at the chat. Susan says, right, what's the root? And other Susan says, the root is amen, related to emunah and faith. Right, brilliant. So the root of that word, which brilliant people asking about it, it actually means all these things which people are talking about. It means faith. It means confidant. It means, like the word amen. It also does mean like a nursling and like one who looks after one who is being nursed. Really, and it also really does mean also artistry, like omenut is art. So the root of the word, the root letters, aleph, mem, nun, or that word amon, really do have all the connotations there. So it's not, that although it seems they might seem to us they're making this up, they're actually not making any of it up. It's really all based on the word itself having all these meanings, and that's usually the case. So great, thank you for asking and clarifying that. Right, Jethro has so much on this root, exactly, right. So there are so many, sometimes the root has like maybe one main meaning or maybe two or three, but here there's really a lot. also strong and enduring, right? So that's connected to the sense for like faithful, amen, and confidant, like something which you can trust, some similar kind of thing. And that's also related to the person who said in the Midrash, it was great. Brilliant. Let's carry on. Let's see one more Midrash, ancient Midrash, also very early from Lamentations Rabbah, and then we're going to see some mystical commentaries on related ideas, and actually revisit some of these texts from a later mystical perspective from the Zohar and others. So this Midrash, bottom of page 4, Lamentations Rabbah, Rabbi Huna and Rabbi Yirmiyah said, in the name of Rabbi Kiva Abba, about the verse, they deserted me and did not keep my Torah. So this is God, according to the prophet Jeremiah, complaining about us, saying the Jews deserted me and didn't keep my Torah. And then the Midrash imagines what God is saying with this verse, because the Midrash is asking the questions really like, well, of course, if we deserted God, we deserted the Torah. Like the two go together. Like, who would do one without the other? And why is God going on and on about it? Like, of course, if, what's the big deal about that? So here's what the Midrash says God is really saying that. When God says they deserted me and did not keep my Torah, God is saying, I wish they would have deserted me and kept my Torah, because if they would have engaged with it, the light within it would have returned them to good. This is astounding. When I first came across it, I had to read it a few times. I'll say it again. God is saying, according to the Midrash, I wish they would have deserted me and kept my Torah, because if they would have engaged with it, the light within it would have returned them to good. Meaning, just like I can't even like say it. It's so crazy. It's so radical. Like God, according to the Midrash, God is okay with us being, at least sometimes, not really into the whole God thing. Like God like understands. Sometimes in everybody's journey, apparently, I mean, at this point, we're talking at a specific point in history and specific like suffering that's happening with the people. But like God understands. Maybe the people do not want to be in a place of relationship to God. Like maybe that's part of the way things are. He's saying, but like, don't throw away the Torah. Like please, the plaything, the nursling, the artisan, whatever it is, like, please keep it. It's gonna be good for you. Yeah, I feel like there's something really like beautifully like parental here. Like it's like kids, like, okay, you don't want to do everything I say, or even like you need some space and distance, fine, but like don't just like take that thing which I know is really gonna help you and throw it away. Like please, like please keep it around. It's gonna be good for you. Shira says, is there any instance of the reverse? Maybe don't take the Torah but embrace God. Oh. We're going to see something a bit like that, actually, Shira. We're going to see a Hasidic rereading of this Midrash. Oh, wait, are we going to see it? Oh, no, I cut it from the sheet because I ran out of space. So, yeah, there is a source like that. And I ran out of space and time. But if you remind me, I'll email it to you after. It's from the Chernobyl Rebbe from the Moed. Yeah, great question. Great. All right, so that's a little bit of ancient Midrash. I feel it's important to ground our studies in things which are, it's not just like this newfangled mysticism. A lot of Kabbalah is from the 1300s. The Zohar, that's when it emerged. Turning to the next page, see there from the 13th century onwards. And a lot of time, other streams of Judaism are suspicious of Kabbalah, and do not embrace its authority. But a lot of the key ideas in Kabbalah actually come from the ancient Midrash, which is completely part of Rabbinic Judaism, completely inseparable from that. Anybody who wants that other source, please email me, because I won't have the chat after the class, and then I'll be very happy to do that. There's a comment from a few more comments. All right, let's see. Susan says, important to know, I think that God doesn't say the Torah, but Torah. Thank you. Yes, that is really helpful, Susan. Torah as teaching versus the book itself. Brilliant. Yeah, that's really helpful, Susan, because we are talking about the mystical Torah, right? Something called Torah rather than like the Torah that we have down here. That's exactly the point. Exactly. Thank you for clarifying that. Shmuel says, you have the prophets who chastise the people, focusing on sacrifices and worship to the detriment of caring for one another. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Shmuel, that's a great response to Shira's question also. There's a lot in the prophets like that. Brilliant. Wonderful. Thanks everyone for that. Let's continue by looking at some Zohar and see what it does with these ideas. And then we'll move into the realm of the Hasidim and more practice oriented. So Zohar, central work of Kabbalah. As I said before, it says that it's about and written by and full of the teachings of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Is that completely true or partially true? Nobody knows. Academics are more skeptical. Though those generally more traditional who accept and embrace it see some kind of connection there. I really don't know what to say about it, except that's what it says. And I feel like at this point, when so many people are so deeply connected to it, I guess I'm not such a historicist. It doesn't matter to me so much if it was like the historical figure of Rabbi Shimon, like the same person who was in the Talmud, who it's about, but like these teachings are about somebody called Rabbi Shimon, even if that person never existed. And that's the person we're celebrating on like baOmer. So even if, as I say, this person never historically was, that's who we're talking about. And when so many people are engaged in a relationship with this person in so many ways and so many levels, there's a certain reality there, regardless of historicity. I want to say that's kind of how I view that whole question. So Zohar, we find that the Blessed Holy One is a master artisan, and Torah corresponding to him and beside him is an apprentice artisan, as it says, with him as an artisan. So that's the Zohar's take on the Midrash we saw before from Genesis Rabbah, and the words in square brackets, master and apprentice, are from Daniel Matt's amazing commentary and explanation of the passage. And he sees it very clearly that that's what the Zohar is actually saying. So just to revisit, the Midrash said that the Torah was an artisan's tool, meaning like God was using the Torah in the way that like an architect might use scrolls or something else like that. But the Zohar is saying, no, the Torah is an apprentice artisan to God's master artisan. So it's just like a slightly different take on that idea. I think a really rich thing to imagine, the Torah there like being like trying to help God with his project, her project, its project. Okay, carrying on Zohar. The Blessed Holy One gazed into Torah and created the world. So we just saw that exactly in the Midrash, right? God looks into the Torah and creates the world. This is the Zohar's take on that. A human gazes into the Torah and sustains the world. Thus, the making and sustenance of the entire world is Torah. Happy, therefore, is the person who engages in Torah, for they sustain the world. So this really epitomizes the mystical take on the rabbinic take on what Torah is on a meta level, meaning, as Susan said, Torah writ large, not like necessarily the Torah that we happen to have here. So God looks into the Torah and creates the world. People, when we look in the Torah, that sustains the world somehow. And therefore, the making and sustenance of the entire world is Torah. There's no separation between text and world. There's no like, oh, now I'm going to do something related to the world, and now I'm going to learn Torah. Like these things are truly, truly one. They're truly, truly symbiotic. This is a truly embodied and worldly relationship with Torah. Carrying on, Rabbi Shimon, meaning the Rabbi Shimon said, "Woe to the wicked who say that this Torah is nothing but an ordinary story. They look at this garment and no further. Happy are the righteous who look at Torah properly. As wine must sit in a bottle, so Torah must sit in this garment. Therefore, concerning Torah, one should look only at what is beneath the garment. So all these words and all these stories are garments." So many of us might be thinking, well, we're during the earlier sources when we're saying like Torah is light, Torah has God. Actually, I didn't go into this one, but the Midrash from Lamentations Rabbah, when it talked about the light within the Torah, that relates to other early Midrashic material. Some of us learned together on Hanukkah, and you're welcome to contact me if you want the sources, that God put God's hidden light of creation in the Torah. And that hidden light of creation, the Or HaGanuz, is a light that we can see the entire universe with. So that's what that was referring to. And some of us might be thinking when we come across these ideas, like, okay, yeah, fine, nice. But like, what does that have to do with the actual Torah that I'm reading, which is talking about, what do I do with my cow and what do I do with my slave, and all these things that don't seem to be full of mystical light of oneness, right? There seems to be some disparity here between these things. It's not always easy to see the connection between them, certainly. So the Zohar is saying, look at what's inside the garment. Look at what's inside the bottle, right? Wine needs to be in a bottle. A person needs to be in clothes. Things need to be clothed somehow. Right? clothing, garments, both covers things, but also reveals things, right? If we were not, none of us were like wearing clothes, we wouldn't be able to go outside and interact with other people, right? So like things need a garment to exist in this world and to have relationships with others, but also don't mistake the garment for the real thing. Susan says, clarifying question, where is the word Torah in what we are looking at? I mean, Hebrew, is there a different word? Good. So it's the Aramaic word for it. The Zohar is in Aramaic, and the Aramaic word is the last word on the first line, which is oraita. That's the Aramaic word for Torah. Yeah, thanks for asking that. And also, I didn't talk about this yet. The word Torah itself means teaching or showing the way. That's important to know, and we'll be playing with that and as we go on. Leslie says, we live in a world of form, and our challenge is to see beyond the form. Beautifully put. Absolutely, Leslie. And the Hasidic Rebbes and Kabbalists very much talk about that, the relationship between form and substance, which is a dichotomy that goes back actually to Plato. And a lot of Kabbalah was very influenced by Neoplatonism, it seems, and seeing things in those terms. So that's actually right on. And maybe Rabbi Ora says, maybe see beyond the narrative. Right. So there's a story going on in the Torah, but like what's going on underneath it, right? Exactly. Beautiful. Wonderful, friends. So this is just great having this back and forth with you in this way. It's great. Let's do one more piece of Zohar. Happy are the righteous, whom the Blessed Holy One has taught deep mysteries of above and below, all through Torah. For whoever engages with Torah is adorned with crowns of the holy name, since Torah is the holy name. And whoever engages in Torah is inscribed and crowned with the holy name, and thus knows hidden ways and deep mysteries of above and below, and never fears. So I just realized, I think I skipped the one at the bottom of page 5, didn't I? The one-liner. Torah is the name of the Blessed Holy One. That was that, right? And then this one I just read was a bit of a longer development of that. If Torah is God's name, which is just a fascinating idea, which we're going to sit with for a while. We're going to be with this one for a while. Torah is God's name, right? If that's the case, the Zohar is saying, when we engage with it, we have some kind of mystical elevation, right? We are adorned with crowns of the holy name, whatever that means. And we have mystical secrets of above and below revealed to us. And we're given courage. We don't fear. Right? So in all kinds of different ways, engaging with the Torah is going to be great for us because it is essentially God's name, which according to many sources is very connected to God's essence. There's a very tight connection. Everyone expresses it slightly differently about what the connection is exactly between God's name and God's essence, but they're very connected. So if we're engaging with God's name, something great is happening to us. Talian says it is not in the broadest sense, it is all Torah. Right. So Talian, you're asking about this connection between Torah and life and saying, sustaining the world is Torah and everything in the world is Torah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's it. And Talian, actually, thank you for saying that, because that's another way of understanding the idea that God looks in the Torah and makes the world. In other words, yeah, everything in the world is Torah, right? It's right. It's all connected. So people understand that, on different levels, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. But yeah, that's very much it. Beautiful. Harry and Jill ask about the crowns, right? So there's thanks for mentioning that. There's a beautiful passage in the Talmud which says that when God was putting crowns, the ornamental tags, crowns on the letters of Torah, if anyone's ever seen a Torah scroll, you know that some letters have these little crowns on them. So the Talmud says that God put them on there so that Rabbi Akiva, many generations later, will be able to understand them and learn out many secrets from them. And that Moses himself didn't understand that. So yeah, I think it's interesting. The crowns being mentioned here, I think, is an allusion to that whole mystical wisdom. It's an allusion to that whole world. And remember, Rabbi Shimon is the main student of Rabbi Akiva. So yeah, that's all very connected. Brilliant, thank you. All right, let's keep moving. This is Nahmanides again, the great Torah commentator and mystic. And this is an example of how he brought Kabbalah into the mainstream of Judaism. He slipped in these mystical secrets into his Torah commentary. And we'll just read the first paragraph here. And you will see an idea that we just came across in a slightly different way. He says, we have a mystical tradition that the whole Torah is comprised of names of the Holy One, blessed be He, and that the letters of the words separate themselves into divine names when divided in a different manner, as you may imagine by way of example, that the first verse of Bereshit, Genesis, divides itself into these other words, Beroshit bara Elohim. I'll explain that in a second. This principle applies likewise to the entire Torah, aside from the combinations and numerical equivalents of the holy names. So let's just explain that. We saw in the Zohar say, Torah is God's name. Great. Ramban is giving us like a very factual, tachlis, down-to-earth, concrete explanation of what that actually means in a certain way. He says, the whole Torah is God's name, right? Or several names, actually, multiple plural names. And it can be divided up into all kinds of different words. So we have a Torah where the first three words are Bereshit, bara, Elohim. In the beginning, bara, created, Elohim, name for God. But he's saying you could divide those words up differently. And then you would get a slightly different or very different, radically different understanding of things. And we have the Torah that we have. The Torah that was, written traditionally, the tradition says was given on Mount Sinai, is how it is. But the mystics are saying that the Torah we have also contains, on some level, all these other possible ways of dividing up the words. These are called permutations, different ways of dividing up the words, and therefore all these other possible different meanings. So that's Nahmanides. And then the next paragraph, which I'm not going to read, is just there to show how he is giving the mystical commentary more authority. What he's doing is he quotes Rashi, who's totally not a mystic, just very, very mainstream, and quotes an example of Rashi talking about a similar idea. And we don't have time to go into what Rashi says there, but again, anyone who wants to ask about it after the class by email, I'll be happy to help. Susan says on the chat, also, there is a part that says that Moses went up and saw God joining, knitting the crowns to letters. Exactly, Susan. Yeah, that's the story with Rabbi Akiva, exactly, that Harry and Jill mentioned before. Exactly, that's exactly it. Brilliant. So we've seen ancient Midrash. We've seen medieval mystics, the Zohar, may go back earlier, but it emerged in the Middle Ages, and then Nahmanides also. Let's see the Hasidim. The Hasidic movement started really in 1740 when the Baal Shem Tov revealed himself, and we're going to see teachings now from students of the Baal Shem Tov about taking the ideas we've seen and bringing them a little bit more into the realm of practice, also just the realm of imagination. Some of what we're going to see now is just mind-blowing. So let's look at a top source on page 7, Teshuah Chain, from Rav Gedalia of Linz. He says, I received from the Rav HaMachiach, Rabbi Yehuda Arielei Kleiner, who said in the name of the blessed Baal Shem Tov, that when the Messiah comes speedily in our days, he will expound upon the whole Torah from beginning to end, according to every possible permutation of each and every word. And after this, he will make from the whole Torah one word, making combinations beyond number, and he will expound upon all the combinations. So the Torah, like we've been seeing already, we saw in Nahmanides clearly, you can put all the letters together and then divide it up in all kinds of different ways. And the Messiah, may he come speedily, is going to do this. He's going to explain to us all these seemingly infinite different meanings that the Torah contains. So that's part of what it means to be redeemed, is being open to and understanding, having a relationship with all these different layers of meaning of the Torah. And that comes up a lot in the Hasidic teachings, the idea that, the Torah as we have it right now, okay, it's fine for the world as it is right now. The world as it is right now is not perfect. But in a perfected world, we will have a Torah that is also perfected, fully revealed, and so on. Similar, but different, and I think even more highly imaginative take on this idea is in the next teaching. So it riffs off this passage in the Talmud, and then it builds on it. So the Talmud, I can actually say this one outside, don't need to read it inside. The Talmud is talking about the question of how come the tradition says that Moses wrote the entire Torah when near the end of the Torah, it says Moses died. So the Talmud says, well, what happened? Did Moses write the words and Moses died and then die? Or did Moses stop writing, and then Joshua, his main student disciple who was always with him, take over. So that's all the rabbis offer there. The Rav Yehuda, or maybe it was Rav Nehemiah, they say that Joshua wrote the rest, and Rabbi Shimon, right, says Torah is complete, right? Because we have a verse in the Torah near this, that near the end of it, where God says, take the Torah and put it next to the Holy Ark. And Rabbi Shimon says, if you think there was a letter missing from that Torah, you've got another thing coming. Torah is, as we know from lots of other teachings connected with Rabbi Shimon, this mystical being. It's this mystical entity connected to the names of God. There's no way Rabbi Shimon's Torah could be like, oh, all of the Torah except the last few verses. Doesn't work for him. Torah has to be complete. So how does Rabbi Shimon explain it? He says, Moses wrote about his own death in tears. So God said, Moses, I'm going to tell you what to write. You're going to write it. Moses sat there and wrote, and then Moses died crying because Moses didn't want to die. There's a whole big thing about how Moses didn't want to die. That's Rabbi Shimon's view on what happened. Now let's see an astonishing teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, given the name of the Baal Shem Tov from his students about that. Our blessed sages, I'm reading Machazeh Avraham now, top of the next page, top of page 8. Our blessed sages said that Moses wrote the final 8 verses of the Torah in tears. That's what we were talking about. I heard in the name of the great rabbi and teacher, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, of blessed memory, that the word in tears, when the Talmud says he wrote it in tears, bidima, means mixed, as is known from the Talmud in Gittin 52. So that's true. I looked it up. Go to this other place in the Talmud, the same word is used to mean mixed. So it can mean, like lots of words, as we've been discussing in this class already. It can have multiple meanings, and this particular word means these 2 things. It can mean in tears, and it can mean mixed. Okay. Now comes the Hasidic rereading, which switches one for the other. Instead of Moses writing in tears, Moses is writing mixed. Let's read on. This means that those verses contain other permutations, for the Torah cannot lack a single letter and remain fit for use. We know there's like a practical reality in Jewish law. If a Torah is missing a single letter, it is unfit for use. So it must be, like Rabbi Shimon was saying, the letters were there, but the Baal Shem Tov is saying they were there in other permutations, meaning the gaps between the words, the letters were different. It was different words. But during Moses' life, the letters of those verses formed different permutations. So Moses sat there writing the letters, according to this teaching. Moses sat there writing the letters, but the words were different because the gaps between the letters were different. And so Moses didn't write, and then Moses died. Moses wrote whatever letters it was, and maybe it was like something we'll never know until Messiah comes, right? We don't know what that was, right? But then after, and there's a longer teaching which actually says this explicitly, which explains it more. It would have taken like 3 pages to put the whole thing in. After Moses died, says the whole Torah changes to reflect reality. That what Moses wrote becomes the words that say, and then Moses died. And the longer teaching that explains this more says that's what happens with everything in the Torah. Like Adam and Eve do such and such in the Garden of Eden, then the words of the Torah reflect that. In other words, the Torah is a reflection of our world and our reality, as well as all the other things we've been saying it is. It's infinite and it's mystic and it's God's name. It's all the Torah that we have down here is a reflection of our reality. And it could be so many different things, right? All those other infinite meanings and permutations are there. And what changes it? What brings out the Torah? What makes the Torah different is what we do. When we do different things, the Torah changes, right? And obviously, I'm talking on one level kind of historically, like that's what happened at the time of things which were happening inside the Torah. But the Baal Shem Tov is also talking about our relationship with the Torah now, and we're going to see that now in his students. Right? We're going to see some teachings from the Mor Einayim, the Chernobyl Rebbe, one of my favorite and closest teachers, a very close friend and student of the Baal Shem Tov, and a few different teachings from him about this. So he says in Shemini, Mor Einayim on Shemini, bottom teaching on page 8, it is known that the Torah is called that. Remember we said Torah means teaching, guiding, because it is a guide to the way to come close to the essence of the blessed God. So literally the words he used in Hebrew is Moreh Derech, which actually, it's funny, That's how you say tour guide in modern Hebrew. It means a guide for the way. So the Torah is a tour guide, but like where is it guiding us to? Guiding us how to come close to the Creator, to close to the Infinite One. Since the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was built, the mitzvah, commandment or connection of the 7 days of inauguration, as spoken about in our parsha, that's Shmini, where he's saying this comment, must somehow apply in every moment of time through the dimensions of space, time, and being. So he's saying, he's commenting on one specific part of the Torah, and he's saying it's about the tabernacle, the portable temple, and it's about the 7 days of inauguration for that. Some very, very specific thing about something that once happened in the wilderness. But he's saying, no, it's not about some specific thing that happened once in the wilderness. It must somehow apply in every moment of time, throughout space and time and being, the 3 dimensions of reality for the Kabbalists. As he goes on, for the Torah is the name of the Blessed Holy One, and God and his name are one, and just as he was, is, and will be, so too the Torah. So he's saying our relationship with the Torah hasn't changed a bit, right? God, the source of life, is in the Torah, and everything in the Torah is happening to us and for us right now. Of course, we need to discern somehow what that means, right? What does that mean? Let's look at the comments. Rodrigo says, is Pardes 4 levels of interpretation in the Torah related to the 4 olams? Sometimes I have the impression it does. Stop being related to olam. Yes, good question. 4 layers of interpretation there, which is relevant to what we're talking about. The plain meaning, the alluded or hinted to level, the explained level with the rabbis, and then the secret level. That's what Rodrigo's referring to. And yeah, that does relate to the 4 words of Kabbalah. I want to move on. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but yeah, there's a connection there. And I'm grateful for the question because, we are talking clearly. We've gone on a journey clearly into the mystical meaning of the Torah. We're trying to understand like how the mystics see that, right? And so it's helpful actually to bear in mind all those 4 levels of how the Torah was understood. And those 4 levels are first mentioned around the time of the Zohar from the other Zoharic literature that mentions them. So it's the Zohar itself and the school and the people around the Zohar who first articulate that idea that we're reading the Torah not just on the surface level and not just on the legal level and not even just on the level of hints, but we're deliberately reading it on the level of mysticism with the inner experience that can't even be shared in language. Yeah, thank you for that question. Let's do a little bit more and I think for the sake of time, so I want to do practice with you guys. I might not read all of these because they maybe we'll skip the next one. Yeah, I think we can. I think for the sake of time we should. It's wonderful, but we'll do the last 2, and I think we'll get what we need for the practice. So moving to more, and I am on Pashat Ki Tisa, the middle one on the last page. It is not possible to ascend to the level of freedom immediately. Rather, one first needs to be like a servant. So it's a really important teaching for him and the other Rebbes that before we have this kind of like free and easygoing relationship with God and the Torah, and it can be whatever we want it to be, there's real work to do. There's real work to do, and we need to really serve. And it's really important to say, and it's really important that he says it. And one way it's articulated is in the balance between yirah, awe, and love, ahava. That you can't have one without the other. You need both. The mystics are very clear on that. So and they feed and nourish each other. We have written already several times, he says, about the secret of these and those are the words of the living God, says in the Talmud Neruvin. For the words of God are pure, sarufa, that's a quote from the Psalms, from Psalm 18, meaning permutated. Now this is great. These and those are the words of the living God is saying there are lots of different ways of interpreting the Torah and they're all right. And then he says this verse from the Psalms, which says God's words are pure, the word for pure is sarufa, and that is the same word, the same root as permutations and permutated. So he's using the verse from Psalms to say the Torah is permutations, as we've been discussing throughout many sources, that we can permutate, we can understand the words in lots of different ways. But here comes now like some real like tachlis, down to earth practice for us. Therefore, a righteous person, and by the way, he says that we're all righteous people in potentia, so it's not just like someone else, it's all of us. A righteous person may annul harsh decrees, i.e. change reality, by inverting the letters and creating a different permutation. And this is done with dat. Dat is awareness, consciousness, knowledge. For there, the letters are elevated and unified. So we're going to see another source which talks about this in a second, but just to articulate that last one clearly, with the right dat, knowledge, awareness, consciousness, we can change reality. Why? Because everything is made up of the letters, everything in the Torah and everything in reality. And actually, this is mentioned in the teaching I skipped over for the sake of time. It goes back to our ancient sages. It says in the Midrash, it says in the Talmud, reality is made up of the letters, of the letters of the alphabet, specifically the Hebrew letters, the 22 letters. That's what reality is made up of. So when we have awareness and consciousness, just like we can read the Torah differently, we can read reality differently and change reality. And we see one more piece on this, and then I'm very happy we're going to have time for some practice where we're going to get a taste of this ourselves. More I'm on Pashat Devarim, last source. The righteous person connects lower levels to what is above and serves with abundant dat, awareness or consciousness, and expansive joyfulness, elevating the world of awe that's associated with gevura or din, that's judgment, severity. The world of awe, they elevate that to the world of pleasure, which is boundless inheritance, where no harsh judgments exist. So I'm just going to translate that from Kabbalese now. The righteous person connects lower levels, this world down here, to what is above, good stuff, infinite good stuff, and serves with abundant awareness and expansive joyfulness. This is a happy kind of mysticism, right? This is not dour. Elevating awe, judgment, severity, stuff which is challenging in life. And also a necessary part of life. Nobody is saying that's bad, but stuff which is challenging in life, stuff which is on the left side of the tree of life, which is associated with severity, we elevate that with da, with awareness and joyfulness, to the world of pleasure, bina, that is gateway to infinite consciousness. It's one of the upper sefirot. It is upper understanding. It is also one of the it's associated with teshuvah, with returning to our higher self and our best self. It's associated also with the world to come, olam haba, with essentially infinite good life. So as he says that, it's a boundless inheritance where no harsh judgments exist, right? When you're in that kind of olam haba, that like boundless good place, there's nothing bad happening, right? We've got beyond that at that point. And all this is through dat, awareness, consciousness, for they are constantly highly aware that the mouth of God is speaking in them. So again, specific practice instruction. I want us to work with this in a couple of minutes. Awareness that God is speaking through me. Awareness that everything that's happening in me is God happening through me. That's actually how he defines dat in several places. The Monaim says, dat is awareness that everything happening inside me, around me, everything is all the oneness of everything. As Rabbi David Cooper says, God is a verb, and God is Godding through me and through everything around me. All of this is God Godding. And through this, carry on, finish the source, and through this, they elevate the world of speech and awe and extract the world from harsh judgments. So things which are normally mundane, things which are normally challenging, can be elevated in this way, through this awareness, through this consciousness. And that, again, that changes reality. It takes the world out of harsh judgments. And it is exactly God who is doing this through the peace of the divine, which dwells inside the righteous person and says words. And all this is possible, he says, not because we're so great, not because it's like some kind of magical manipulation of reality in some external way. It's just God. This is the oneness. I'm just letting the oneness do what it wants to do through me. That's what the practice is, right? It's not like I'm going to do this now. It's just like I'm going to let the divine, the oneness, do what it is doing through me. That's what we're going to practice with. First, let's take some time for what's on the chat. I'd love to hear responses, questions, clarifications, whatever. Let's see. Cheryl says, avert the harsh decree. Is this concept of permutation part of teshuvah, etc., prayers during the high holidays? So the harsh decree is certainly a language that's used a lot during Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I haven't seen so much like specific linkage between this idea and that period more than any other period. The Hasidim really, the Baal Shem Tov and his students talk about doing this practice all the time. So maybe especially then, maybe it's especially relevant, but it's for them, it's just, the way things are always. Thanks for the question. That's great. Leslie says, each letter form exists in our world, but also exists in the space-time continuum and bends and twists and illuminates in ways we strive to understand. Oh, what a great articulation, Leslie. I love that. Thank you for naming that. But I'm going to say something else related to that, building on that, riffing off that. So yeah, the letters, we have like concrete letters in front of us when we read a text, right? And as Leslie's pointing us towards, every one is itself a mystical being, right? Every one itself exists beyond our imagination. And that's what we're being invited into here, to look at the letters and see something much bigger than just what we see on the page. Oh, Harry and Jill say, changing your name, right? So if a person changes your name, if the letters are the DNA of the universe and have, I think the Baal Shem Tov says, the letters have worlds and souls and divinity in them. They have infinite divinity in them, the letters. So when we change our name, that's an incredibly important thing, right? The Baal Shem Tov says our name is an expression of our soul. Our name connects us to what our spiritual work is. If a person wants to know what you're here to do, they say meditate on your name, study the letters of your name. So if we change it, yeah, we're doing something very, very significant. Yeah, and hence that, as maybe you're alluding to, the earlier rabbinic texts say if a person is very sick and they are recommended to change their name as a way of changing their situation, for example. Great. Wilma says, what about Lag baOmer? Good. Thank you, Wilma. Very welcome question. Let's bring it all back to Lag baOmer and then let's practice. I mentioned in the beginning. Sorry, take a sip. Mentioned in the beginning different ways of understanding Hod, the quality that Lag baOmer epitomizes, because Lag baOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, which is celebrated as this inner spiritual revelation. I should say one thing about that. Why is that the case? Because Shavuot is the revealed revelation, right? Shavuot is when the Torah was given traditionally in Mount Sinai. So that's what we're working towards. But fascinatingly, the mystics say before you can get to the open revelation, you have to have the inner mystical one. Just that, I feel, is like, just that I can take and live with, right? It's just like, before I can actually get the revelation, I actually need to do the inner work myself, right? That's a big part of the message here. And Hod, as I said before, is making space for, it's allowing, it's surrendering, it's humility, it's gratitude, it's admitting what is. And Lag baOmer is that times that. It's like that multiplied by itself, it's that squared. So when we do that work, and that's what exactly the practice we're going to do in a moment, of really accepting and allowing and making space for and surrendering to what is, then many of these sources are pointing us towards the fact that we're making space for something to emerge that's much bigger than us. We're making space for a relationship, as the Chernobyl just said in that last source, where God can speak through us and God can act through us, right? And something that's the definition really of a mystical experience, right? So that I just mentioned before, those 4 levels of understanding the Torah. The mystical means it's something that's happening inside me, and that I can't really ever really share fully with anyone else, but nobody can, right? So that's what we're about. That's what Lag baOmer is about. That's what these teachings are pointing us towards, and that's why it's celebrated as the inner revelation of the Torah. In my very quick articulation of that, anyway, I'm sure I didn't do it full justice, but hopefully I tied that together enough. You can work with that. Any other questions or thoughts before we practice? Yes, recording will be available. Yes, that's what it's for. You'll all be sent it. Let's practice, friends. So make yourself comfy for about 10 minutes of meditation, whatever position is good for you. If you want to turn off your camera, that's totally fine. Whatever works for you. And we're going to begin with a settling practice and a calming practice of focusing on an anchor, one thing to keep our attention settled. And if you already have a meditation practice you do regularly and you want to use whatever anchor you usually use, please use that, whatever you usually use. What I suggest for most people most of the time is a neutral place in the body that we can feel without getting too much adverse pain or anything else like that. And often the soles of the feet or the backside or the elbows might work for most people. Or find a place in your body or some other anchor that you can use as your place to keep bringing your attention back to. And that's our job. For the next couple minutes, we'll just settle down. I'll be quiet, and our practice is going to be just focusing on that place in our body, or whatever anchor you've chosen. And every time our attention wanders, we're just going to bring it back there. Keep deepening our awareness there. Keep coming back to your object, paying attention to it, trying to feel what's happening in that place you've chosen. Now I invite you to notice the life force flowing through you in whatever way you want to notice it, whatever it happens to be showing up in your body, in your being. Just notice that you're alive, however you can experience that right now. Maybe in bodily sensation or something else. I invite you to turn towards, to open to the possibility. This life force that you can feel in yourself, it's the same life force that's flowing through everything. Just notice what happens when we introduce that possibility. Notice all the different responses. And if it's possible, just to be with it, to experience that life force, and to hold that possibility. Let's try and do that for a minute. Everything we're experiencing, nothing is excluded here. Our whole experience, everything we're thinking, feeling, seeing, hearing, just opening to the possibility. This is all the oneness that is flowing through everything. Now from this place of what our teacher, the Rebbe, the Moranayim, called that, this awareness that everything is the oneness. I'd like to introduce a question for everyone to be with, however much you would like to. That is, what is the Torah for us? What happens when I say the word Torah, you think of the Torah? What do you imagine? What do you feel? What do you experience? What are the associations? What is our relationship with it? Notice whatever arises. If you need to return to your object, your anchor, to focus, to ground, fine. If it's possible to stay in that place of doubt, in that place of turning towards the possibility that everything you're experiencing is the oneness moving through all things. Let's stay there for another couple of minutes together. Let's gently bring this practice to a close. Take your time. Feel free to stretch or move however your body wants to. If anyone has anything they'd like to share or anything you'd like to ask, you're very welcome to. Alan, hi. Oh, was that a wave goodbye? I think it was a wave goodbye. So, in which case, I'll just say thank you so much, everyone. Really, really wonderful to be with you and practice together. And I'll send out the recording. And really, Lag Sameach, as we say, happy Lag baOmer when it comes. And I hope this will be helpful for whatever happens. Look forward to being with you all again soon, I hope. Sending blessings.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.